Good afternoon. Eman Al Yousuf from Dubai, United Arab Emirates. I'll be sharing a really personal story with you for the first time in my life. Writing the not self, stories that live within. In 1979, my 14-year-old mother left home in Baghdad, Iraq. She left her dolls, childhood pictures, clothes, school friends, neighbors, certificates, and the short jasmine tree she loved so much in the backyard garden with a swing her dad made. She never returned. To my mom, home became just a word. My mother still remembers the night her family escaped Iraq. In the borders between Iraq and Jordan, they told the soldiers that they were going to a cousin's wedding in Amman, and that they will be back by next morning. Their faces had to lie too. They had to look happy, believing their fake relatives lie, pretending that tomorrow morning isn't more than 30 years ahead. Darkness and fear are all she can recall. For her, the morning they all waited for never came. She experienced loss of home, security, and identity very early and had to live with it for the rest of her life. Watching her little brother wet his pants in the car that night, watching her father have to lie, and her mother shivering helplessly, she lost the innocence of the child and teenager she was. Lost trust in the world, something in our family's image cracked forever. My grandparents, aunts, and uncles became refugees, citizens of the world ever since. 34 years later, I wrote my first novel, The Window That Saw, which was inspired by my mom's story. My novel discusses the meanings of citizenship, homeland, identity, and ideology through the perspective of a woman named Zainab and 3 generations of her descendants. Originally from Turkey, Zainab abandons her disabled husband and escapes to Iraq in the 1940s. In the wake of her escape, her grandchildren experienced the 8-year Iran-Iraq war. Her great-grandchildren suffered the invasion of Kuwait in 1990, and finally, her great-great-grandchildren escaped to Canada as refugees. When writing, there are no others. None of the characters you bring to life, nor the incidents you create, are far from your innermost soul. One can't simply write outside of one's inner self. It's a writer's pain, suffering, and yearning that gives birth to a good manuscript. To quote Haruki Murakami's novel, Kafka on the Shore, it's like Tolstoy said, "Happiness is an allegory, unhappiness a story." The following are examples of writings that came from authors' pain and agony as part of their personal trauma and experience, which I would like to share with you. When the Chilean writer Isabel Allende's grandfather passed away, she was unable to be by his side. Back then, she was in Venezuela, politically exiled for 13 years from Chile, her home country. Because she could not be with him, Allende wrote letters to her grandfather that later became her most famous novel, The House of the Spirit. Later, her daughter Paula got sick and died. Isabel wrote about this devastating time of her life in a novel called Paula, which went on to become a bestseller and a hit. Hundreds of thousands of people who suffered the loss of loved ones found great relief in reading Paula. In Black Milk, the Turkish writer Elif Shafak wrote about her personal experience with fearing marriage, meeting her husband, and postpartum depression. I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou is another example of a great work that emerged from female trauma. There's a huge difference between writing fiction and a biography. In the latter, there are mere facts. Biography is a life as seen by its writer's eye without tricks and special techniques, whereas imagination plays a more central role in writing fiction. Some writers have a hard time separating between their daily journals and fiction works, such as Anais Nin, who used to write for psychological therapy and confused her biography with the first novels. However, no writer can write a great fiction without living it. In June 2014, I was watching the news and got shocked by the footage of ISIS members destroying Iraqi artifacts. History going back to 10,000 years was being erased within seconds, erased forever. Lamasu, the human-headed bull, sometimes lion with two huge wings, a protective deity that dated back to the Assyrian era 10,000 years ago, got destroyed. Jonah's shrine, which has special religious and historical importance in Mosul city, where the population is an uncommon, near equal mix of Muslims and Christians, was bombed. I got depressed. I couldn't eat or sleep well for weeks after. Finally, I decided to write a novel about the destruction inflicted by ISIS. I decided to write a novel about it because I realized that only events that are made into stories get immortalized, and that in one way or another, no matter what we write about, we always write ourselves. Every word I wrote lived in my heart and soul for some time before it was written. Somehow, those very words will live forever and are much harder to destroy.
This question is for Eman. My name is Eman Abu Isa, and I'm just curious, how do you draw the line, I guess, between extremist and normal for identity purposes? You brought the Assyrians' culture, 10,000-year-old civilization for the people in that part of the world, and then you are trying to identify, the people in that area where people are divided between being Muslims and being also trying to draw the line between extreme Islam and moderate Islam. How do you portray that?
Okay. Well, thank you for your question. Such a great one. When I wrote the novel Guardian of the Sun, or The Sun's Guardian, Haris al-Shams, I was not thinking of actually illustrating that. I had the problem back in my background because I saw it on the news and I wanted to address that to immortalize the case or the issue. But what I did actually is what I also do in my short story groups or collections. And all my short story collections, neither or either of my characters have names. I address people with adjectives, like, for example, she's funny, he has a cat. I don't have names, religions, because at the end of the day, I believe that we share the same problems, obstacles, feelings, love for life, hate, everything. But the other things that you see, like that differentiate us, and that shouldn't. In The Guardian of the Sun, the main character is Hussein Mansour, and he lives on the area that got bombed at the end of the novel, which is the mosque or the shrine of Jonas or Yunus in Arabic. And he had really just one simple dream of owning a piece of land. And this was a symbolism of the belief that connects the identity and citizenship. Like, he believes that if he is a citizen of his country, he should own a piece of land. And then grow sunflowers with their friendly faces or friendly appearances that will just brighten the country and resolve the problem. It's a romantic idea that may solve a problem in his perspective. The story has a lot into it. It has something that you would read and at the first glance, and then you will get from the main character, and it has these different angles or perspectives that come within. Again, to answer your question, so I did not talk about these things maybe in a very clear way. One more thing to address is that one of the 8 great wonders of the world is the Hanging Babylon Gardens, and it's not visible, it's not there, it's buried underground, and excavations in the 90s, beginning of the 90s, discovered that they are not actually in Babel in Iraq, but they are beneath the mosque that was bombed. So imagine that gardens and treasures and gold and a lot of, jewelry, like the 1,000 Arabian Nights, 1,001 Arabian Nights, are just beneath this amazing area of land, and people are living these really small dreams every day without knowing about this fact. So I hope I answered your questions. Well, I come from a mixed marriage. My mom is Iraqi, my dad is from the UAE, and I had a lot of trouble growing up. So although it may look like they're really Arab countries and close to each other, but there's a huge difference in between. And I think that when it comes to writing or thinking about when do you start, where is the line between self and not self, I'm a total mess. And that's why we write. That's why we keep questioning. It's the uncertainty that makes us rethink and search and write. And I don't think we'll ever stop thinking. So.
Worried about what's lost if we judge fiction by nonfiction standards, as if a novel or a poem is just an illustration of an ethnographic study or some kind of sociological survey. And I'm not a writer, but it seems like to me, aren't there also standards of judging that are sort of internal to fiction? Like, how does this relate to the plot? Or am I doing justice to the character as they're developing? And how do you weigh those out versus whatever, I don't know, some critic or some academic or some politician might say? Thanks.
Can I answer? I'll start with. When I write people, and I was happy when the Guardian of the Sun's Guardian was published, and readers would tell me that this so-and-so character would remind me of my uncle that I really hate, or or my mother, or a part of me, or someone who I saw on the street, and I don't really think of any opinions or readers when I write, maybe just what Gina just said right now. I remember people, and I have like this mosaic of pictures and characteristics that goes into one character and creates familiar faces and suffering and pain and group of dreams. So yeah, at the end of the day, we'll find similar people that you can just are familiarized with, friends or yourself, reflected in my work. So.